Welcome to Mental Fitness, the Gateway to Success podcast, providing business owners, leaders, and entrepreneurs with the 3 INs: insights, inspirations, and intentional actions. Delivered through monologues and dialogues, we address topics like leadership, productivity, time management, work-life balance, and challenges like stress, conflict, mental health, and much more. Please do not hold back from suggesting specific topics and guests you would like on this podcast. Greetings and welcome to this episode. Time doesn't exist. I know it is quite a statement to come out with. If you have followed any of the other episodes in this topic around time management, you will understand by now where I'm coming from and why I wrote the book, Time Management, a Complete Waste of Time. What I want to do in this episode today is dive a little bit more into that idea that time doesn't exist, but more importantly, why that is important. And then even more importantly than that is to move this episode today towards so what? If you really look into this idea or this thought that time doesn't exist, you will come eventually to that reality that it doesn't. And that part is relatively easy. What becomes more challenging after that is like, so what? What am I going to do with that information? And what do I then do? I have this day, I got this calendar, I see there's 24 hours available to me today. What am I going to do with that? And if I can't call it time management, what shall I call it? What is it really that I'm managing then? So I want to get to that in a really practical way so you got something you can take with you today from this episode. I also want, because I'm quite excited about a book I've discovered recently by Alan Watts that I wanted to share with you, because there's some really, really interesting information in that around this topic of time. So let's first just dive into a couple of quotes in my book, in the Time Management, A Complete Waste of Time, around the myth. So in the last episode in this series on time management, I went through the 7 myths that trip us up in various ways. But what I didn't mention is that there is a myth like number 8 or number 0, whatever you want to call it, that is like the biggest myth of them all. And I do cover that in the book. And that is the myth that time exists and that we can manage time. So just a quick quote here. This is from Albert Einstein, the scientific approach to things. The distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. So we got science going, yeah, time doesn't exist. And then we have people like Eckhart Tolle, Alan Watts, Krishnamurti, all saying the same thing in different ways. I got some quotes in the book from that. I want to grab another quote by John Maxwell, and it says, time management is an oxymoron. Time is beyond our control, and the clock keeps ticking regardless of how we lead our lives. Priority management is the answer to maximizing the time we have. And that's what I want to get to more in the sense of, so what does that actually mean? And then we can come back to so-called time management, but we will come back to it in a far more powerful and a far more useful way. So recently I came across a new book by Alan Watts. And I love Alan Watts because I love his language and the way of him presenting things. So everything in this book is written by him, but the book is not made by him. So people have taken things from various writings of his and put them into a book, things that are centered on the title of the book. And the title is Become What You Are. And it, for me, is such a beautiful title. and he explained in those writings, it is explained quite clearly what is meant by that. So it's a really clever title. And there's one chapter in there's a fairly short chapter. And I don't know if this book is actually available as a physical book. I have it as an audio. And I love listening to these when I'm driving because it's just really nurturing for my soul and for my mind. And I'm going to just read out a couple of things from this one chapter that is specifically about time. And in this one, there's a reference to this thing we call enlightenment. And he says, in short, it is to be detached from both past and future and to live in the eternal now. For in truth, neither past nor future have any existence apart from this now. By themselves, they are illusions. Back to Einstein again, same language. Another quote from here. For the moment is the only reality, and there is nothing beside it in relation to which it can be said to move. Thus, it can be called at once the eternally moving and the eternally resting. So this moment in his language is both moving and resting. So again, that dichotomy or whatever the word, there's another fancy word for that I've lost right now, of things seemingly opposite but are still the same. Put in the comments what that word is unless it comes to me shortly. One last quote from there. Hence, the now is something which you can neither escape by flight nor catch by pursuit. There is no coming toward it or going away from it. It is, and you are it. Become what you are. I don't know, I just find that this like almost poetic. And his language is just, for me, just amazing. And he's managing in that to present something that is so profound. But again, I think through his language becomes more accessible. It's definitely more accessible to to me. So once we come to this reality that time doesn't, there is only now. And you can say, well, there's a past. Yesterday happened. Well, yesterday happened. It sure did. But if you want to look into the past, you're doing it now. The past only exists as a memory in our minds. Other than that, it has no existence. Because when you were there yesterday, it was today. It was now. Every single now. Now, 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 and now. That's all there is. So, well, I can think about tomorrow. Yes, you can think about tomorrow. You can project something into the future and say tomorrow will come. But again, that's a thought, not a reality. By the time you get to tomorrow, it happens to become today. And every moment of tomorrow becomes the now, this moment that you're in. So if you apply your mind, it becomes quite clear that time does not exist in that sense. And hence this idea of you can't manage it either, which is a reality. It cannot be managed. So what is really important for me is sort of this next step. So what do we do with that information in a way that is useful, that is powerful to dealing with what it is that we're dealing with? Now, if the vast majority of people had no problems with time management, they had no problems with stress and burnout and frustrations and so on, then why would I write a book about time management? Like everybody would just be mostly happy and stress-free, and there will be no need for the book. There will be no need for me even talking about that in this podcast. But reality is, I have interviewed a lot of people for the book, and I've been doing this kind of work for 30 years. So I have met a lot of people that are in staggering levels of burnout and stress. or frustration and pulling their hair and going, there's just not time enough in the day, or there's too many things, I can't fit it into my day. And I feel sorry for time because time is taking so much slack, so much complaining, so much blaming. And it is not time's fault. It can't be because time doesn't exist. So because I see a lot of people having challenges with that, and having been there myself, having experienced tremendous amount of stress and burnout and depression, and go and listen to the episode. It's probably the last week episode of this podcast with Lloyd Shand, where he is talking about sharing his, in a very vulnerable way, his burnout, his depression. So there's plenty of stories out there, and if you're listening to this, you may not have gone into that depth of despair, but I don't think you'll be listening to this if you were just like, oh, time management, not a problem. Oh, I'm stress-free, life's great. I am in control. I'm in the driver's seat of my life, my business, and everything else that is happening in my life. So I'm sharing this because I know that that's not the case for most people, particularly most people in the world of business, and management and leadership. So with that, what what is the value of this information? At one level, the value is that we can stop pretending that we are doing this thing we call time management. Because what it does to our mind, when we deal with illusions in our mind, the mind thinks it's real. It's like when you're having a dream. In that moment, your mind believes it's real, and you can wake up in a dream in a shock because you're falling. And you go, oh, no, I'm not falling at all. So that is an incredible power our mind has. It can imagine things as real even though they are not there at all. And time is not there, but if our mind has been convinced that it exists and therefore I can manage it, now the mind will go, okay, and it will go about managing something that is not there. And that's not going to work. That's the basic reality because you cannot manage something that doesn't exist. So it's really important for you to shift the language in your mind. Outwardly, you can still tell people, "Oh yeah, I got this time management system, and I'm managing my time really well. I'm feeling really good." You can say that because if you tell people, "Oh, time doesn't exist," I don't suggest to do that too often because people go, "Yeah, whatever," right? But when you realize that yourself and understand that, you can let go of that in your own mind. And then you can start calling it what it really is. And what is it that it really is? Well, in that one quote from the book there I read, I think he said that I think it was a priority management. Other people say it's task management. What I like to call it is you management or self-management. Because if you are here in this body, then that's real. This is reality. I'm here right now. That's real. You can take photos of it. It's a reality. And the thing with things that are real, we can look at managing that if it needs to be managed. So if the forest needs to be managed, if the garden needs to be managed, the garden is real and we can go and we can manage that. The business you're running is real. The staff is real. You can go out and manage that. So you are real, which means you can choose to manage you, which is entirely different to time management. And that's in reality what it is, what it takes to have a life, have a business, have a family without all the tension and the stress and the frustration. How is this now relating into this topic of so-called time management? I'm sure you're familiar, most people are familiar when I ask about the important urgent square. This square, these four boxes of important, important, urgent, urgent, not important, not important, not urgent. And almost every client I've worked with in the past, when they come to me, they have the important, urgent overfull. And when your important and urgent is exploding, is overfull, you will experience levels of stress and potentially like things like burnout or depression. Or for other people, it's more anger and frustration, depending more on your personality. So if you know that square, you also know where the focus needs to be. It needs to be in this bottom one, bottom left one, which is the important but not urgent. And when you focus on doing things that are important but not urgent, there is not that tension, there's not that stress in that mixture. Because the reality is, whatever is in your important square, if you are not doing it, it will slowly, bit by bit, rise up and eventually ends up in urgent. If it really truly is important and it's not getting done, it at some point becomes urgent. And many people do not have the drive to do the important until it becomes urgent. And the urgency creates a drive to get things done. That is really, really bad. You can do that occasionally, but when that becomes the norm, that is what leads to burnout, to stress, which then impacts on physical health, which then impacts on family life, parenting, relationships, and general happiness and joy in life. So the question then is, since it's not time management that's going to get this stuff done, and it's not time management either that is going to help decide what is actually important. So here's the reality is that for most people, they are treating far more things as important than they can actually fit in to their life. And that's a recipe, again, for stress. And if that's what you want, absolutely, you can have that. I'm not here to tell you you shouldn't be stressed or burn out. Like that's not my job. It's not, I'm not here to make that decision for anyone. Um, but when I shifted out of that for me and found a completely different way of dealing with this, managing this, I can recommend that because stress is virtually non-existent in my life and burnout is not on the horizon ever again in my life. So the crux here is once we see time doesn't exist, we can't manage time, I exist, I can manage me. What what drives me is the things that are important in my life and the reality that I need to do that which is important as much as possible before it gets urgent. There will always be urgent stuff showing up. That's called life. But if your urgent important square is full of stuff already, then every time new urgent stuff comes in, it just explodes. But if it's mostly empty and you're operating primarily in important, then the occasional urgent is not a problem. It's like, oh, urgent, we'll deal with that, bang, and then we're back into the important. So now the real question, like the stuff I really wanted to get in this episode eventually, is how do you define what is truly important? Not what you think is important, not what other people tell you is important, not what your wife or husband tells you important, not what the kid says is important, not what the government tells you that is important, but that which is actually important to you. And that comes down to a few very, very basic questions you can ask yourself. And that is, who am I? And what is it I want to experience on a day-to-day basis? And who is it I want to be on a day-to-day basis? It's not about the doing. It's not about what business you're in. It's not about whether you're married or not and how many marriages you want to go through. It is about who you are, who you want to be day to day, and what you want to experience as a being day to day. Not in 10 years' time when XYZ happened, but now, because there is only now. And who do you want to be in each now from here on? And when that becomes absolutely clear to you, then that becomes the driver. And then it is staggeringly easy to decide day by day, moment by moment, what it is that is important to you. And your clarity of who you are and who you want to be and what you want to experience now becomes the driver to take the actions that you need to take to experience and be who you want to be. And that is a complete paradigm shift. That is a transformation. And for me, when that became clear to me, that was one of the bigger transformations in my life because it now sets me up or set me up with a completely different foundation. And not only is it that I've been doing this for decades and coaching and sharing this with others, you don't need to get the book, but please download the free guide because it is focusing on this, the life mastery framework that I created to support you in this journey. And as you see, this is the number one. The you experience is everything I just talked about today in this podcast. This is where we start. Time management systems start here and down in this area, which is why they are not very effective and efficient because they're starting in the wrong place. So we don't go here and do our daily action plan, our to-do list. We don't go here and design, what are the outcomes I want and what is the pathway to that. And we don't go here and look at what is it that's important in my life. You can't actually truly do any of these until you've done that. This is number one, and it is the biggest chunk in my work. If that's all I do with a client, then that's enough. They can figure out the rest. It's pretty straightforward. I do have a structure and a system for it, but we have got to do this first. And when that is in place, at least to a good degree, you can keep working on it. You can keep elaborating on it. You can keep questioning it, testing it, and adjusting it, which is all fine. But when that's in place for you, then what is it that's important in your life? The areas of importance become so easy to decide. And then designing the pathway for how to show up in these areas of importance, how to show up to work, how to show up in your relationship, how to show up, say, as a parent, how to show up with your physical health, your mental health, your emotional health, your spiritual health. Become straightforward. And then what actions you are going to take today just goes on your to-do list. And I'm fine if you want to call that time management because you're managing the 24 hours you have. I'm okay with that. Like, but it's not your time that you're managing. It is your actions. It is what you're going to do today that you're managing. And yeah, you can put that in. So that's going to take half an hour. That's going to take 2 hours. That meeting is going to take half a day. Or you can put that time on it so that you know that by the time you get to the end of it, when you're in the morning planning it, You know that you're not putting too much on your list because you know roughly how much time in our day-to-day clock measure of time that's going to take. But again, it's not the time you're managing. It is you that you're managing. And then you can get to this one, which I have found is one of the most difficult parts of all of this for people, even though you think it should be the easiest, is actually celebrating the success that you're creating on a day-to-day basis. Not once a year or once a quarter, but every single day. Get into the habit of doing that. So that's my invitation for you today is to download that. I'll put the link in the description below so you can get that. But in some ways, you don't even need that. Just take some time out, please. Block out some time in your time management system and go and sit on a mountaintop or a beach or a cafe or whatever's your place. And sit down with some pen and paper or whatever notepad you have and ask yourself the question, who am I really? And what do I want to experience on a daily basis? And who do I want to be on a daily basis? Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Mental Fitness, the Gateway to Success. If you have stories of how mental fitness has benefited you that you are happy to share, go to my website, mikal.nz, click on podcast and fill in the guest application form. If you want direct support from me utilizing my 40 years of mental fitness learning and practice, email me at coach@mikal.nz or message me on LinkedIn. Any feedback, review, share, follow, like, or any other good stuff is, of course, appreciated. Thank you for listening to Mental Fitness, the Gateway to Success podcast. I'm your host, Mikal Nielsen.